they set out a big lavish, table with elaborate, silverware, and they've had a banquet in there. And I think that was one of the main kind of sort of event spaces of the day.
Right.
That's not something I think.
No, we would definitely not be allowed to do that
anymore. Yeah.
I'm sure there'd be people who would really love to do that.
I know, it'd be a great space, I'm sure.
I'm sure there'd be a lot of weddings who would be delighted if we would let them have a dinner in there. That would be something. Well, is there anything else you'd like us to know about the book?
It's basically arranged chronologically, so it covers, like I said, the entire history of the museum from its founding through to a brief kind of resume of the last 20 years or so.
Right.
The focus is, the historical images with a final chapter that brings it up to date. But it also there's also a chapter dedicated to the Art Academy, because we have a lot of their records down in the archives. Because we were associated so long, we still retain a lot of materials relating to the academy, to the students, photographs, student records, that sort of thing. So there's a chapter in there which contains some really nice shots, classes back from the 1880s, and of the Beaux-Arts balls. There are some fantastic shots of those from back in the day. I really enjoyed putting it together, and it's the quality of the images. It's never looked better. They've come out really well. So I'm really pleased with how it looks. I only know of one mistake so far. It was an honest mistake. I went by the information that was on the back of the photo, and it only came to light afterwards that the way the name was spelt was wrong.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think that's quite forgivable.
Yeah.
I think that's not too bad.
But it was still frustrating.
Yeah. I always have a lot of questions about the building. People ask a lot about the building's history, and people are pretty fascinated by just the architecture itself, and seeing it in its sort of different configurations over the years is I think, really interesting to people. So I'm sure people will just get a kick out of just that alone. You get used to even seeing certain phases of the building, and then every once in a while I'll see a new picture of it, like in some new configuration where, like, oh, this wing was built, but this one wasn't yet, and it's taken from this angle I'd never seen before. You go, oh, whoa, that's really crazy looking. Like, I would never imagine, it's just, I don't know, it's just really interesting to see this space that you walk through so often, and how different it used to be.
Yeah. There is a handy diagram at the front of the book which shows the layout of the museum and each of the wings and when it was added, so you can trace how it evolved. And there are plenty of photographs that go through that show how it was originally just, the original building standing alone on the top of the hillside, and then you can trace through the additions of the various wings over the years, and you can see the Adams Emery wing go up in the 60s and the original facade disappear, which is something I wish I could have seen in the flesh, as it were.
Yeah.
Because it's a shame we lost that at the time, I think.
Yeah. Well, and that's something I always feel about, like, walking underneath the building sometimes in the, underground tunnels and things that we used to get around, is that sometimes those edges of history are a little more obvious almost because they're not public spaces. So they haven't been, like, sort of tidied up or polished. So you see those sort of weird joints and things that butt up against each other, and doors are like a really dead giveaway of, like, we don't tend to change doors out too often in this place. So you'll go through this really old wood door at one point, and then you get to this sort of like 60s metal door, and then you get to like one of these newer wooden doors, and you can just tell by like the fixtures and stuff, like roughly when these were put in, and you kind of go, oh, okay, I'm in this part of the building. I'm in a really old part of the building now.
You can see down in the basement, you can see the massive, like, blocks of the original building, the huge sort of stone by the sort of by one of the old service entrances there, where there's also the cobbled floor down in the basement, which was originally an open courtyard that was later covered over with galleries above. But that was where they used to bring in deliveries of, coal and whatnot, because it used to be coal-fired boilers here until the 40s at least. So, the coal dust used to be, things were still being, cleaned of coal dust well into the
Wow.
80s, 90s, I think.
That's crazy.
But yeah, those little sort of echoes are still down there, and when you know what you're looking for, you can spot them.
Yeah.
And it's like, even in the galleries, I've looked at so many pictures now. There's a bench up in one of the galleries, a big old wooden bench, and I noticed it in one of the older photos with Phil Adams standing, leaning against it. And, now I just, every time I go by it, I just kind of like, just gently touch it and I go, "Good morning, Mr. Adams." It's just one of those things I can't help, it's just one of those few things where there's a sort of I can definitely see him standing there with it. And it's just a kind of a little link to the past, which I enjoy.
When the CAC was celebrating their big anniversary a year or two ago, they were showing photographs of their original sort of space here in the building. Mm-hmm. And I immediately recognized the staircase in it. And I was like, oh, I know where this is. Even though the rest of it was all very unrecognizable, there was still this like element that I was like, oh, I know where those stairs are. So it's so funny how as much as things change, there will be just like at least something in there that lets you identify where you are in the building. Yeah,
those stairs are, one of the few things you can trace, way back. Because there are photos from, very early on when there used to be the galleries of archaeology and ethnology down there. So there were, Native American artifacts and artifacts from Africa. The collection that's now in our current African galleries, the Steckelman collection. It was down there in the basement originally.
Interesting. So that was open to the public.
Yeah,
you could just walk down those stairs all the way down.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It was wide open then. Now it's kind of the kitchen, the museum kitchen's down there, and they've sort of been subdivided. But back then it was open gallery space.
But it makes sense too. I mean, we have to kind of fight to keep people from going down those stairs, which kind of is a sign that like their original intention was public, because there's not a lot otherwise. I mean, just the other day I end up like, I could see people lost down there, and I sort of,
they're inviting.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't go anywhere I mean, you have to have a key to get anywhere really exciting anyway. So once you're down those stairs, it's really, we say it's for volunteers and cause it's not high security or anything. So I ran into some folks just sort of looking,
how did I get here?
And they're trying to get out, and this was when the front door was closed. So I just was like, "Oh, here, just come through here. You'll be out in a second." So yeah, people still do wander down those stairs. So that makes a lot of sense that they were not always off limits.
No, definitely not. I mean, after those galleries were moved, there were classrooms down there for educational activities, and then the CAC was down in that space as well. So it's been used for a lot of things over the years. And I think there were galleries down there relatively recently where the staff sort of lounge eating area is now. That was galleries until sort of relatively recently, until the 90s. The Damascus room was down in the basement at one point. Every space has been used for, multiple things over the years. It's always changing.
Interesting. I guess the auditorium was built in the 30s or something time around then, wasn't it? Or?
Yeah, the main auditorium was in the late 30s, and then the
lecture hall.
Yeah, the smaller one was added in the 60s,
which, if you've ever looked at its crazy lighting panel back there, it's very obvious it's from the 60s because it looks like something from 2001. Like, it's like, I'm sure high end technology for the day, but it is like so hilariously like weird and chunky and like, just all these switches and levers and like knobs and things.
Enterprise control panel.
It kind of, it's very like that. Well, I thought we could, normally we go into the galleries to look at something on the show, but I thought since we're talking about the archives, if you don't mind taking me down to the archives and we'll look at some stuff there.
Yep, I'd love to.
Awesome. Thanks. We are now in the archives, and you've pulled out some stuff to look at, and I'm assuming this is original floor plans here?
Yes, this is the original first floor plan for the original museum building, which opened in 1886 by James McLaughlin. You can see his signature down there. But this was the extent of the museum at that time. It was 2 floors. Ground floor was sculpture gallery, and the main entrance hall, which was also full of sculpture, most of which were casts at the time.
Sure.
First floor, second floor was the painting galleries.
Okay.
But, almost as soon as this building opened, they were complaining about lack of space. So it's not something that's a recent development.
No, it's like the eternal museum complaint, I think, at all museums everywhere. So, yeah, this is really interesting. The thing I'm most excited about is just to see ticket office and coat room, like where they are, which is like basically where elevators and stairs are now, if I'm not mistaken.
Today, when the main entrance is where you pass into the Cincinnati wing from the museum Great Hall, so that you can just see some elements of that original entrance as you pass that were exposed during the renovation of the wing back in the 90s. But where the ticket office is, I think there's restrooms there now.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. Those would be restrooms, because the elevators and stairs I'm thinking of are here in front of the stairs.
Out,
yeah, you're right. Yeah, I was mistaken. Yeah, because. I'm thinking of where those... You can actually see... It's kind of funny because even on this little drawing, you can see those little columns. These little circles of those double columns that are on that archway. So, yeah, it's like pretty easy to identify. The other room over here, the fountain room, looks remarkably similar, too. Like, with the 2 windows there... I guess there's more windows that are closed off, probably, it looks like. And these 2 galleries, too, it's kind of crazy how much this looks... exactly alike in some ways.
Yeah, the central sort of artery then was the sculpture gallery. That's now where the Miro hangs. Yeah. And on one side there are galleries, and on the other side is where the cafe is today. That was open at the time, and it was an additional sort of that space was filled in the early 20th century and turned into galleries. And underneath there is where the cobbled courtyard that we were talking about in the basement is. That's what covered that.
Oh, okay. That makes
sense.
There's
the stack, one of the museum's one of the few things you can still sort of see of the original museum building. Right. Which was originally it was a smokestack for the museum's coal-fired boilers until the 1940s. When those were taken out, it just purely became sort of decorative. It doesn't serve any function anymore other than to be kind of one of our noticeable features from the and of course back then the steps up to the second floor on the opposite side of the hall to where they are now. When they added on the Schmidlap wing back in 1907, they demolished the original staircase to create the opening for the gallery that runs from the Great Hall, and the stairs were rebuilt to create an archway over the entry to the wing, and that's where they stayed until the 1940s. And that's when, at that point, the staircase was demolished. The Great Hall a floor was put in to separate it into 2 levels, and it was turned into gallery space. So for a long time there was no Great Hall, there was no staircase, until it was reintroduced in the 90s in the big renovations at that point. So today the staircase is on completely the opposite side of the hall to where it was originally. Yeah. So in the archives we've got, it's a mixture really. The main part is obviously the museum's records. So kind of its day-to-day operational records, blueprints like the one we've just been looking at, correspondence from the director, and exhibition records, photographs. We also have, as I mentioned, records from the Art Academy of Cincinnati. The majority of what we have is dates from the very early time when it was the McMicken School, so from the 1870s onwards through to sort of round about the 1950s. And we've also got the third part of the archives are the Cincinnati Art and Artists collection. So it's a mixture really of material that has been collected by the museum over the years relating to local artists and collections that of the original papers of artists that have been donated to us. So we're a great resource for anybody